We are going to start straightway, but I want to give you a little information that may be useful to you as the day wears on. The men's room is out of this door and around to the side. The women's room out of this door and around to the side. And also, those of you who are here who are getting CEU credits today, you will need to register at the table at the entrance. Is anything else I need to say about that, Sandy? All right, you need to register and sign the kind of forms that you're accustomed to signing there. All right, fine. Well, as most of you who live in Houston are aware, there's been some controversy between District Attorney Patricia Lykos and the Police Department, represented here today by Executive Assistant Chief Michael Durden, regarding the arrest and prosecution of people reasonably believed to be drug users. They can or don't have to talk about that today, but you're aware of that. District Judge Michael McSpadden has been critical of the clogging of our court system by users of small amounts of controlled substances and of the limits placed on judicial discretion by our mandatory sentencing laws. Russ Jones, a former narcotics agent, now a leading spokesman for LEAP, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, has contended repeatedly that many of the problems we attribute to drug use are more properly attributed to our drug policies. Russ has a new book which is available in the lobby called Honorable Intentions. It's about more than his, and to me quite interestingly, about more than his experiences with drug policy as an agent and as an advocate of reform. But it's well written, it's very enjoyable, and it will be available to you out there. As will, by the way, the book that we'll be discussing this afternoon, Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in an Age of Colorblindness. I greatly appreciate all of our speakers here today for taking time out of packed schedules to be with us. Each speaker will have up to 10 minutes to speak, and I'll give some time, as I've done with the other speakers, leaving us 10 to 15 minutes of time for them to talk among themselves. And we'll start with Chief Durden.
Good morning. I'm Michael Durden. I'm an Executive Assistant Chief for the Houston Police Department. I run the Strategic Operations Command. I want to thank you for inviting us here to participate in this really important dialogue with a couple of people who are very close friends of mine, District Attorney Pat Lykos and Judge Michael McSpadden. I want to point out, just to make a distinction of sorts, in the public, you hear about a disconnect between the police department and the District Attorney's office over the policy of not accepting charges on trace evidence cases. Now, I want to make it very clear that disconnect is not between the district attorney and the police department. It's actually a disconnect between the district attorney's office and the Houston Police Officers Union. It is the union that is pushing the issue of accepting charges on every case. Those of us in administration work very closely with the district attorney's office on a daily basis, and we recognize that there are practicalities involved in enforcement of some laws, and there are opportunity costs that are involved for us as administrators and directing resources toward enforcing certain types of cases. So we are in one accord on that particular issue in terms of how it relates to our uses of police resources, and also in our understanding of the concepts of fundamental fairness. Just like anybody else in America who has an interest in due process, we recognize that part of that responsibility is that when you charge folks with cases involving chemical substances, illegal substances, or whatever it is, and you have to do chemical analysis, you have to have an ample sample amount where the item can be tested by both the prosecutors and the defense. We recognize that and we understand that, so that's not an issue. Regarding the issue at hand, trying to evaluate whether or not the war on drugs has been successful or as a failure, I think right now it is too early to tell whether or not it has been completely successful, and it brings a chuckle because it raises the issue, well, how much time do you really need, Chief? But when you look at the issue globally, we understand that there have been some challenges in our approach to trying to eradicate the use of drugs in our country. I would point to when I started in policing 25 years ago, there was a proliferation of open-air drug markets across this country, and we even had some in Houston. And along with those proliferation of open-air drug markets came a requisite amount of violence that was associated with that in our inner-city neighborhoods. Due to the combined efforts of law enforcement in interdiction and the combined efforts of educators and social scientists and other public servants in dealing with education, we have been able to eliminate that to a large extent. The rate of violence related to narco trafficking in our inner cities is decreasing at a rapidly rate. It's decreasing along with the rate of violence across the country. And then I'm not speaking with respect to the issue of narco violence related to the Gulf cartels and some of the things that are coming out of Mexico. That's a totally separate issue. But if you judge it by that, it's been a success. However, if you judge it by some of the other things that have accompanied the war on drugs, then you could arguably say it hasn't been as successful as we would have intended it to be. One, if you look at the disparity in sentencing that were created by the federal sentencing guidelines with respect to crack cocaine and powder cocaine, and the extent to which it disenfranchised some people in the community and also arguably denied some folks equal protection of the laws, you can argue that it was a failure. If you look at the cartel violence emanating from Mexico, and you're capable of making the link that that violence is related to the continuing demand for that product in this country, then you can say that the war on drugs has been a failure because we haven't done a very good job of decreasing the appetite of Americans for the use of those illegal substances. And let's be very clear about that. That violence is related to our appetite for substances over here. They're fighting over routes into the United States to sell their product. If you look at the amount of seizures related to asset forfeiture in this country, for a long time, the apparatus related to the enforcement of illegal narcotic activity has been funded and fueled by our ability to seize illegal funds and use those funds for the public good. We recognize and in our interdiction efforts that traffickers are getting smarter. It's becoming more and more difficult to seize funds. It's becoming more and more difficult to seize cargo. It's increasingly difficult to secure our borders. And so at some point, we have to take a realistic look at our ability to allocate resources to deal with the growing demand for the product in our country. And I'm just keep going back to supply and demand because the bottom line is we can talk all we want about what we want to do with prohibition and what we want to do in terms of enforcing narcotics laws. But it's clearly the demand in this product, demand for the product in our country that's fueling the issues that we have right now. I have a background in economics, and it's one of the things that makes me a little bit different in law enforcement. I understand the concept of supply and demand. And unfortunately, in our country, I mean, if you believe what Jude Wanniski and Arthur Laffer and all the others said years ago, that supply creates its own demand, perhaps that's an indication of what's occurring with the issue of illegal substances. But overall, not simply as a law enforcement professional, but as a native Houstonian and a person who grew up in America, in the inner city of America, I shudder to think what this country would be like if everybody was stoned. You know? So from that respect, I think the success, to the extent that the combined efforts of law enforcement and educators and social scientists and judges and prosecutors have been able to convince one 7 or 8 year old that, yes, to the extent that they were able to convince one 7 or 8 year old or 10 or 12 year old or 15 year old that the use of substances or the inappropriate use of substances, especially illegal substances, is likely to have consequences far beyond you can ever imagine, then I think the war on drugs has been a success, and I thank you for allowing me to talk.
Good morning. I'm Pat Likas, your district attorney. And with respect to the trace policy that our moderator mentioned, when I first took office, I met with our chief prosecutors, the hardest nosed one. I said, how do we improve the system? And number one on their list was dealing with trace cases. Now, I made a decision years ago never to learn the metric system. I think it's un-American. I don't care how many kilometers an hour your car goes, all right? But the drug trade has compelled me to learn a little bit. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a gram, okay? Now, we were prosecuting people for state jail felonies for trace cases. Sometimes they had a little flake extruding from, mucus extruding from their nose, a little flake here, maybe a little residue in a crack pipe. So we began research, and we discovered the minimum amount that can be tested twice, due process, state and defense, right? Is 1/100th of this. Okay? 1/100th. And we had thousands of those cases clogging up our dockets, thousands of people in jail, overcrowding the jail. Okay? So then we did further research. Bexar County, San Antonio, their minimum threshold is 1/100th of a gram. Travis County, Austin, I know they're weird, but 1/100th of a gram. Tarrant County is double that, 2/100ths of a gram. So then we put together this policy. We met with the command staff of the Houston Police Department. We met the same with the Sheriff's Office. We met with our Harris County Criminal Justice Council and laid it all out. There were no objections. The only thing that HPD asked is that we do a study in 6 months to see the effect. I want you all to understand that when someone is arrested for a trace case, that officer is out of service 2 to 3 hours. That neighborhood is unprotected for 2 to 3 hours, and with your overcrowded jail and your overcrowded docket. So I told the law enforcement officers, I want you to arrest the drug dealer and the person who supplied the drug dealer and the person who supplied that and the bulk cash couriers and so forth. I want you to work your way all the way up there and cut the head off the snake, okay? Because these are transnational criminal organizations that are involved. Now, I know you all think I'm all warm and fuzzy. But I want you to stop and think of the effect on especially young people to have a record for a state jail felony. They'll be unemployable, unable to get certain licenses and so forth, okay? In addition to that, you talk about surreal. First offense burglary of a motor vehicle is a misdemeanor, and a trace is a state jail felony, okay? So officers are getting time and a half to fight the drug war, and this is their drug war arrest, time and a half to go to court. So the union bosses are not happy with me. Now, I reject the premise that it's a 100-year war on drugs and that it's a failure. I might remind you of history that the Brits, when they had the 100-year war with France, were victorious. Time and time again, France finally prevailed, and that's because they developed a strategy. We're prosecuting the war on drugs as we did the Vietnam War. I would respectfully submit to you that we take a look at what this menace is, okay? So with respect to the societal costs, the disease factor and other health factors involved, productivity losses for people who are stoned, impaired drivers, other accidents, people unemployable, the changes in the brain that are irreversible, that you will never, ever be able to have pleasure because you've destroyed that portion of the brain. They talk about legalization, and it was mentioned earlier, pharmaceutical diversion. We have something called the Houston cocktail, and that's Vicodin and Xanax and Soma, all legal drugs, and the diversion of those drugs is killing Americans, killing Texans. We're poisoning the whole United States because we are a hub and a transshipment for that. We have more deaths now, 5 minutes, thank you. We have more deaths now from drug overdoses, both legal and illegal, than we have resulting from motor vehicle accidents. I would respectfully submit to you that, well, let me show you something. One thing that bothers me is the billionaires who are pushing legalization of certain drugs are the same ones who are engaged in arbitrage and destroying the finances of several countries. Well, they're unable to do that now, so they're switching. But if you want to legalize drugs, let me show you a poster here. One of the most dangerous drugs, and it's increasing in use, a lot of it's coming primarily through Canada into Oregon throughout the United States, is crystal meth. Look at that beautiful girl in 2 years. Drug dealers are merchants of death, okay? Oh my. Now this may have been another cartel member. Unimaginable brutality. Right here, these are 2 kids who were bloggers who were talking about the drug trade. Chief Durden is right. And incidentally, the Chicago School of Economics and the Austrian School are my favorite ones. Okay? Von Hayek, von Mises. It is the demand side. Social controls are the strongest controls. Law are the weakest sanctions, okay? Example, when I was young, no woman wore white shoes before Easter or after Labor Day. Okay? And I think that's probably still the rule, okay? There's no law to that effect. The way I was reared, and I hope Timothy Leary and others are burning in the hottest part of hell, because what they did to this country to make illicit drugs, cocaine, crystal meth, and everything socially acceptable has been so destructive to our culture, all right? So how do we inculcate social controls? Not everybody can have a mother and a daddy like I had, you know? Can you imagine being arrested as a kid? I would have told him, give me a life sentence, just don't let my daddy get his hands on me, all right? But more importantly, my mother, don't shame the family. Don't poison your body. The destructive effects on society with what it is that we do. And you know, we've got these analog drugs coming in too. They're coming in primarily from China and from India. We have begged the Center for Disease Control, the FDA, all the alphabet soups, you know, they ban toys from coming in, and yet they're letting these bath salts come in and mimic cocaine and other drugs like that, and people are dying over it. I don't want to prosecute some kid for possessing incense that really is an analog drug, or the worker in the convenience store. It should never, ever enter this country. That's what I mean about the strategy. Every one of these transnational criminal organizations has a business plan. And what we need to do is to identify what their logistics are. We need to determine how they funnel their bulk cash and so forth. They're involved in human trafficking. They're involved in extortion, in kidnappings and so forth. They're not going to stop. Narco-terrorism is destabilizing many countries across the world. So what we need to do is look at their business processes and their oriented methodology. Is my time up?
You got 30 seconds.
I've got 30 seconds. All right. I am chair of HIDA, which is our regional drug trafficking, high-intensity drug trafficking area. And we're working with all of the federal, state, and local agencies, getting all the intel together so that there's not silos. And we're going to go after the big guys, okay? We're going to cut the head off the snake. Thank you.
Again, my name is Mike McSpadden. I'm judge of the 219th Criminal District Court. I was a prosecutor for 4.5 years. Last 30-plus years, I've been on the bench, and as you can imagine, I've handled thousands and thousands of drug cases during this time. And in Texas, we have always had very harsh, strong penalties for possession of drugs. The proposed intent of the legislature was, of course, to make it so punitive that most people would not even take the risk of using drugs. At one time, before 1993, anything less than 28 grams of a hard drug, cocaine, heroin, things like that, 2 years to 20 years in state prison. In 1993, our legislature created the state jail courts that has already been mentioned to deal primarily with the less than 1 gram. It's 6 months to 2 years, no good time. They spend the whole time, whatever their term is determined to be. During this time, I have watched countless, thousands and thousands of people, as Judge Leica said, receive felony convictions for trace amounts of mainly cocaine. And that, in my own mind, it was just too harsh a penalty for the offense because of the amount. Plus, the felony conviction, has been mentioned, will stay with someone the rest of that person's life. It never, ever goes away. So about 6 years ago, and it also clogged our courts. I want to make sure it sounds self-serving, but it was clogging our court to a point where at one time, a few years ago, 30% of all our cases were less than 1 gram. And we need to be spending more time on your murders, your sexual assaults, your robberies, your more violent offenses, of course. So 6 years ago, I decided to speak out, and I wrote the legislature, the governor, asking that they at least consider lowering anything less than 1 gram, your sugar packet, to a misdemeanor offense, and let us deal with the more serious offenses there in district court. I've written them 3 times each session, and this last session was interesting because 18 of the 22 district courts, such as ours, dealing with your more serious offenses, they all signed on the letter. And that's really unusual when you have that many judges down there from both parties decide that this was not fair and we need to change the law. The legislature has not changed their stance, but Judge Leica has certainly helped. I think it's been 2 years, Pat, that she put forth the policy that they would not accept anything less than 1/100th of a gram. It's made a huge difference because most of those cases we were receiving were residue amounts, trace, because it has knocked down the number of less than 1 gram cases coming to the courts by 60%. So the rest of them are filed as Class C misdemeanor offenses. So during this time, I have watched the increase in drugs every single year. So of course it's not is not hard to decide that the so-called war on drugs has not worked. There's no question about that. I think we're treading water at very best. If, and as Michael said about the supply and demand, overall picture, what I've been mainly interested in, of course, the less 1 gram, but the overall picture, and this is just my own opinion, as Michael said, supply and demand. Demand, unfortunately, we've got people here in the United States that are going to take drugs no matter what you do, no matter how harsh the penalties, whatever. They're going to be, as long as the dope is here in the United States, they're going to use it, no matter what we do. And ladies and gentlemen, we have had many programs from Just Say No to the DARE programs to many other programs trying to convince the public of the harm of drugs. And of course, with the increase in drug cases over the years, it evidently has not worked. I think we need to concentrate on the supply side. If we really were serious, I mean serious, and wanted a war on drugs, we would identify, which we already have, all those producing and transporting nations and put strict economic sanctions on them, no foreign aid, and put the military on our border and keep the drugs out, because as long as the drugs are here, we're going to have a demand no matter what. I don't think there's any question about that. And unfortunately, I wish I had some answers for you on what we could do, but due to the past administration and the present administration, it doesn't look like any administration is ever going to take those measures, because it's a political problem. They don't want to upset any of the Hispanic votes here in the United States, both Democrats and Republicans. So we'll probably go on with this for quite a while. But I just pray for the best, and I appreciate all that the police do for us. Michael told me before, he emphasized that it was the police unions that came out when Judge Likas instituted her policy, because I guarantee you, when I wrote the letters and it became public 20 years ago, it would have been a huge controversy. 6 years ago, I did not receive one negative letter, nor hear anybody, except for the police unions when they went against Pat recently. So I think the public's at least perception of the drug cases down at the courthouse have changed to a certain extent, certainly in the small amount of drugs, because I think they want us to use our facilities better, our resources better, and that's exactly what we need to do. I want to thank you for inviting me here today. Thank you.
Well, good morning. My name is Russell Jones, and I thank you for the opportunity of being here and speaking to you. Ethel Nadelman started off this morning talking about this broad spectrum, and my good friend John Coleman's over here on this end favoring prohibition. And a lot of us in this country are in the middle, and Ethan Nadelman would like to see us moving a little bit more to the right with our harm reduction policies, and I'm the guy over here. I agree with my good friend John Coleman. We do not have a war on drugs. We have a war on people. I've been involved in this issue for 40 years as a police officer, narcotics detective. I've been with the DEA task force. I worked intelligence in Central America during Iran-Contra. As a guest in the Ministry of Interiors of both China and the Soviet Union, I've worked with their narcotics officers. In academia, I've written and studied the impact of drug abuse on the crime index. I've written training programs for law enforcement to identify and record the effects of substance abuse. In private practice, I've worked with both prosecutors and defense attorneys, testifying as a forensic expert on the psychological and physiological effects of drugs and how that may have applied in a rape or homicide case. I've developed and written, implemented, and taught drug programs specifically for court-mandated clients. So I've had an opportunity to observe this issue from all sides. We sit here today discussing harm reduction strategies, and it's like putting a Band-Aid on a malignant tumor. It's like we recognize that the emperor has no clothes. We want to put a hat on him. Thousands of young men and women are dying along our borders. They're not dying due to Mexico's lax drug laws. They're dying over control of the black market routes into the U.S. And we have kids dying New York, Chicago, Houston, San Francisco. While we sit here today discussing harm reduction strategies, kids are dying because of prohibition, like alcohol prohibition, where you had street gang violence, drive-by shootings, adulterated liquor of unknown strength, which was killing people. The war on drugs has created this black market, and the cartels control the production, the distribution, the sales. The drug cartels decide who to sell to, what to sell, when to sell, where to sell, and for how much. And there's only one question they have of our kids. Have you got the money? They're selling a product of unknown quality, of unknown strength, which is killing people, causing death and disease. Cartels don't use attorneys to settle their business disputes. When is the last time you heard of a drive-by shooting between Coors and Bud Light? Or Marlboro hiring a 12-year-old kid to run tobacco from one street corner to another? Street gangs are not distilling alcohol and selling it in our school parking lots. The cartels are not growing tobacco in our state and federal parks. Street gangs are not doing any of that because those products are regulated. Street gangs cannot compete financially with a regulated product. I might also quickly add here, on too many occasions, our misdemeanor offenders who are in possession of small amounts of drugs for personal use, and also innocent victims. We call them collateral damage. They're dying at the hands of law enforcement, militarized law enforcement, on these no-knock raids, kicking in doors, throwing flash grenades. The laws in the war on drugs has resulted in more snooping, sneaking, prying, entrapping, corruption, and violence than any other act of Congress. Our current policy, by all measurable standards, is a failure. Since 1970, when President Nixon used the phrase, the war on drugs. By the way, that war was supposed to reduce death, disease, crime, and drug use. And instead, drugs are cheaper today. They're cheaper, stronger, more plentiful, more people are using. Deaths are up because of an impure product of uncertain strength, and disease because of contaminated paraphernalia. We have crime because of the black market. And drug dealers use multi-level marketing techniques on our young kids. We arrest 1.8 million people each year. 50% are for marijuana. 88% of those are for simple possession. You can treat addiction. You'll never get over a conviction. Conviction is going to follow you the rest of your life. It's interesting, if you use drugs today and you're never convicted, and the term is youthful indiscretion. You can become a doctor, lawyer, cop, DEA agent, politician. You ever notice today in politics, a journalist will apologetically smile as he asks a politician about prior drug use. And the politician in turn makes a joke or remark about never inhaling, or inhaling because that was the point, or they readily admit that either they or their spouse, youthful indiscretion with cocaine, and the audience giggles. It is not funny to the 38 million people who've been arrested in this policy, saddled with a drug conviction on the rest of their lives. There's something wrong with a policy when the penalty for youthful indiscretion is worse than the effects that the drugs may have been. So I believe using the blunt tool of law enforcement to deal with complex social and health issues is counterproductive. And I call for fundamental change in our nation's policy. My point today, at this talk of decriminalization, the softening of our methods of enforcement has honorable intentions. Harm reduction keeps everyone happy. It convinces those who recognize that we have a failed policy that progress is being made. Narcotics enforcement crowd is happy because they're still in the business of arresting drug dealers. Prison industry is still happy because people are still in prison. And the drug cartels are happy because they're still selling drugs. They still control it. That's the problem. We're leaving the recreational drug business in the hands of the cartels. Drug decriminalization will in fact strengthen a drug cartel's position. We need to fight this war economically. We need to legalize and strictly regulate. Yes, we need to cut the heads off the drug cartels. And we will do that by taking the business away from them, just as we took the business away from the alcohol cartels when we re-legalized alcohol. We put the Meyer Laskeys, the Machine Gun Kellys, and the Al Capones out of business. Then we will have money for education. There is no better example, as Nathan Edelman said. Tobacco is the most addictive and the deadliest of all the recreational drugs. 20 years ago, the rate of use of tobacco was over 40%. Today, we're down to 17%, and we've done that without kicking in any doors, without shooting anyone, or throwing anyone in jail. Thank you for your time.
Now, what I would like is for you, if you have questions for each other.
I'll start
Okay.
off. What Russ said is exactly right. If we did legalize the drugs, we would end the cartels, a lot of the, of course, the violence we see every day. The argument on the other side, and it's not especially my argument, but it's a valid argument. If you legalize drugs, you'd have a whole lot of people who would not have tried it before because of the possible penalties, who would probably be experimenting with it. And ladies and gentlemen, all it takes is going to an elementary school, this was an inner city elementary school, where they had a whole class of crack babies. These were siblings of children who were in the class. So that's the argument on the other side. But Russ is exactly right. It would do away with all the cartels and the violence that we see right now. But you have to think about opening it up to a lot of other people who probably would not have tried it before. And I don't have any scientific evidence about it. That just seems like common sense to me.
Well,
not to you.
Yeah, I would add we could use, as Ethan Nadelman pointed out, Switzerland, where if you're a heroin addict, you can go to a clinic. You get a prescription, you go to a clinic. They have removed the street dealer in Switzerland. You cannot make any money. It's not worth the risk reward when you're trying to sell to someone brand new, because once someone starts using, they go to a clinic. They have put the heroin dealer out of business in Switzerland, so no one is selling to the kids in Switzerland.
I might remind you of the Opium Wars.
Oh, God.
How did the Brits... Well, I'm glad you're praying. How did the Brits control that country? It was through opium. Tons, hundreds and hundreds of tons of opium poisoning the Chinese, all right? If you look at the history of our country, during the depths of the Depression, you didn't see the drug usage anywhere remotely that we have today. Again, it goes back to demand, it goes back to social control. Are you going to put the imprimatur of the government on drugs? Are you going to legalize crystal meth? What are you going to legalize? How are you going to control it? Who's going to manufacture it, grow it, harvest it, distribute it? And then they're going to come up with new and better designer drugs, the cartels. They're not just in drugs Drugs is their cash crop, all right? They're into, as I said earlier, human smuggling, extortion, murder for hire, kidnapping. They are destroying nations across the world. When I was a young police officer, I used to be a libertarian type. You know, it's your body, if you want to poison it, what difference does it make? But when you see the damage that it's done to individuals, to families, do you know that over 60% of the kids that are in CPS are the result of their parents being drug abusers? That's not going to be, whether you legalize it or don't legalize it, you're still going to have that condition. You're going to have people committing crimes. Do you want, as you said, a drugged out nation?
But before alcohol prohibition, most people drank beer, wine, or mixed drinks. When we had alcohol prohibition, prohibition drove them from those softer drinks to the hard, adulterated liquor. The reason we have crystal meth, the reason we have crack is because of drug prohibition. It drove them to the harder drugs, which are easier to conceal, easier to sell, cheaper. When we know that people, if given the choice, will use the softer drug. I agree with you. We are going to have problems with drug abuse, whether we legalize or illegal, or keep it illegal or legalize. We're going to have that problem. But what I want to address is all this problem with the drug cartels, these drive-by shootings, these tortures, these kidnappings, which are all prohibition related. I want to end that. Then let's focus on harm reduction with these people who have problems, who have mental conditions, which, by the way, are driving them to abuse drugs. Let's deal with that.
You know, if you ever, and I doubt if you ever have, went to a scene of a robbery of a convenience store and watched a clerk who was laying on the floor with his head blown off because the 16-year-old that came in to rob him wanted more money to buy drugs. Now, he didn't want more money to buy drugs because the drug was illegal or whether the drug was legal. He wanted more money to buy drugs because of the psychological effect that the drug has had on his mental state and his body. And that's multiplied over and over and over again in cities across this country. People are losing fathers and brothers and sisters and others. And violence. Alcohol is prevalent too. Car crash. But I can't imagine that you would want to unleash the same negative effects that we've had on alcohol on the rest of society by widespread use of substances. The impact of having a country stoned, and I'm going to say stoned because if you go back and look at the early years of the imposition of mandates on the use of cocaine and think about what cocaine did to this country during that period when it was legal. And imagine the impact that we would have on it now. It would be incredibly devastating. Absolutely devastating. Unfortunately, we have progressed into a society where people seem to be unwilling to regulate self-conduct. And where people are unwilling to regulate self-conduct, we have people who, like the cartels, are willing to step in the gap to assist them in whatever they choose to do. Now, if the drugs were legal, that problem isn't going to go away. But the effects will still be there. And the consequences on behavior and on actions and on mental state and physical conditions will still be there. You're going to have a bunch of those ladies like that walking around. Right over there. You see that picture. You see the effects of those drugs. That's what we will look like as a society.
Any, let me say something in response to some of the things that have been said here. It is true that our data are far from perfect. The major source of data that we have about drug use and abuse in the country comes from the National Survey of Drug Use and Health, which is operated by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, SAMHSA. They do a survey every year that includes more than 60,000 people. It's a very good survey. It's not perfect. But one of the things, three things stick out in that survey, year after year after year. One is the stability of use. It's not the idea that we are in great epidemics is not borne out by these patterns. I had a slide here, and we didn't have time to show it in the morning, but for the last 9 years, about 22 million people register as substance abusers. 2/3 of that is alcohol. About another 1/6 is alcohol. Here we are. Maybe, yes, here we are. Thanks. Back in the back room where they do wonderful work. This, we have the brown is alcohol only, the green is alcohol plus an illicit drug, and the red is illicit drugs only, making up a rather small portion of our substance abuse disorders in this country. There's the blue, most of these lines here up to the right are the major drugs of abuse. With the exception of marijuana, which is made of 81%, more than 85% of those people have also a lifetime alcohol use disorder. Alcohol is clearly our most dangerous drug of abuse. Now, here's something that's interesting to me, very interesting, and this is, we talk about how we're going to have a stone nation. This is alcohol use. The light blue is alcohol drinkers with no problem. The gray is binge drinkers, but not considered abusers. The dark blue at the bottom is alcohol abusers. Now notice that it follows a kind of a shoe pattern. If you look, that's a sharper pattern with illicit drugs. Notice how it goes along a little bit in adolescence, 12 to 17, jumps up at 18 to 25, and then drops off. And if you can follow that with virtually there's a marijuana use over the last 30 years. 41% have used, this is from 2010, 41% have used marijuana at some time, 10% in the past year, 7% in the last month. And that kind of pattern shows up with virtually every drug of use. Marijuana use, according to the best statistics we have, not only is not a gateway to other drugs, for most people it's not even a gateway to more marijuana use. Here are trends in cocaine, 14.7 ever, 2.1 in the past year, 0.6% in the past month. Crack, smaller numbers all around. Meth use, in 2010 we had 1/3 of the initiates' first use of of meth as in 2002. And we come back to this chart, collapse it down to 12 to 17, 18 to 25, and 26 over. You may note, well, these are 12 to 17% of adolescents in the country have a substance abuse disorder. It triples nearly in the 18 to 25. One of the things we could get rid of in the country, the social problems in America, is boys 18 to 25. And then it drops back down to 7.3% over the age of 26. This is according to our best statistics. Now, that's not simply a coincidence. These are, for the most part, the same people. The CASA at Columbia did a study released last June, which said 90% of people who start of people who have a lifetime substance abuse disorder began in adolescence. That, I'll give you, their point was addiction starts early. 9 of 10 lifetime addicts start using before 18. 1 in 4 early users become addicted. 1 in 25 of those who start 21 or older. Now, it's important to note, it's been pointed out here, that early use is more a marker than a cause, very likely. You have other kinds of things, poor parenting, poverty, abuse in the home, drug abuse in the home that contribute to this more than other things. So, and after you're 26, and this fits for most of us here, 93% of Americans over 26 do not have a substance abuse disorder. Of that remaining 7%, 5% is alcohol only, 1% is illicit drugs only, and 1% illicit drugs and alcohol. I think we ought to keep those things in mind. No one wants, I have 9 grandchildren, and
You want to be on drugs.
and they know where I stand on these issues, and they also know I don't want them to get involved in drugs. But those are different kinds of issues. But we really do need. I appreciate. I have visited heroin shooting galleries. I have seen people's lives destroyed by drugs. But we must move forward on the basis of the best data we have, and we need to keep trying to improve those data. But we need to keep things like this in mind and see the real place we need to place our interest, I think, is in preventing and treating, giving the right kind of treatment to adolescents, because they are the ones, if they develop the problems, they're going to have those lifetime problems. If you have other things to say, Clayton Jones who's a noted expert.
Mr. Lycos, Assistant Chief, there's so much against legalization of marijuana or anything else. Why do you think that everybody's going to be so stupid if they legalize it that our country's going to fall apart and everybody's going to become drug addicts or users of hard drugs? You've got a certain percentage that use it now. It's not going to increase because legality changes.
I would beg to differ with you. There are marginal individuals who don't use drugs now because they're unlawful. You are also putting, if you will, the imprimatur of the government saying it's fine to do this. I want you to recall the late 60s and early 70s. Prior to that, you did not have that explosion of drug use. All of a sudden became cool, became popular. I would submit to you, sir, that we need to, again, weave as a country shared values, accepted standards of conduct, self-control, and responsibility. What drugs are you going to legalize? Why poison your mind? I would further submit to you, and I think the data shows now, that so many of the learning disabilities that children have today are the result of chromosomal damage from drugs used by grandparents, parents, whatever it may be, down through the years. You know what we need to do? When we're talking about changing perceptions and so forth and social controls, remember the anti-littering campaign called Don't Mess with Texas? Very successful, and we sold a lot of T-shirts. So maybe we can come up with another phrase like that. So, Chief?
I was going to say, respond to that. I don't think at any point that I suggested that we would have a country of people being stupid. I did say we did not want a country of people deal with a country that deals with the effects and the after effects of folks who are stoned. And the violence that is related to improper development, diminished mental state and diminished mental capacity, the ability of some folks who are marginal economically to go out and purchase the product. As we see with other criminal enterprises in this country, when people don't have money to engage in things that they want to engage in, they go out and take it from somewhere else or take it from someone else. It's my grandmother or my sister or your brother or somebody else is going to get knocked in the head so that somebody else can buy a product to diminish their mind. And that's not being overly horrific or being overstating the case. It's just an accurate reflection of what happens in the real world. And there are some of us who deal with that real world on a daily basis, and we see it. It's just the way it is.
All right, we have about 5 more minutes, so for concluding remarks, Judge.
Real quickly, there is a huge distinction as far as the juries come down and hear these cases between hard drugs and marijuana. 10 years ago, I wanted to find out how the public, and you get to find out how the public feels through the jury's verdicts. We tried 2 large amounts of marijuana delivery, 200 pounds, 250 pounds. The first one came back probation. I thought it might be an aberration. It wasn't. The second, the jury came back with probation, a huge amount of marijuana. At that time, a like amount, let's say a kilo of cocaine, that had probably sent the person away for life. The jury has made a decision and a distinction, and I think the juries have been telling the court, and it helps us decide what's the appropriate plea bargain to dispose of that case. But I think if you ever start on legalization, your best bet by far, of course, is the marijuana. I think that'd be more palatable to the public.
No one has discussed the pharmaceutical industry.
Well, it's already legal. Yes.
By prescription.
Yeah.
But even then, doctors write more prescription and all that works. So, but it seems funny to me that people don't realize that the people who manufacture and distribute drugs are so extremely wealthy. And how do they get wealthy? They get wealthy by people buying their drugs. Well, if the drugs are relatively controlled by license and this and that and the other thing, they won't have all that money to push things and kill people and do other things. I mean,
Like the alcohol companies don't.
yeah.
That's lots of people. Far more people die of alcohol than any other drug in the country except cigarettes.
Right.
Every year, every day, the equivalent of 2 jumbo jets killing everybody aboard. It's done from nicotine. It is our most deadly drug in terms of the people who actually die from the thing.
That is so surreal. You want to ban tobacco and legalize marijuana.
It would be safer. There are differences. There are differences in the actions of the people, for sure. But it would be safer with terms of health. It's been estimated that it would take up to a person. We could have the different death rates for the different kinds of drugs, including aspirin and all of those, and alcohol. And marijuana comes out as 0. Not zero in some cherry-picked year, but 0 in the thousands of years history of the drug. It's been estimated, and it's difficult to prove this, obviously, that a person would have to smoke 20,000 joints in a day for a lethal dose. My suspicion is that anyone who did that would probably already have surrendered most notions of a productive life. I think what everyone here agrees on, it's very important to think about what is going to be best for children. It's also important, as Judge Lykos has pointed out, that use of any kind of addictive substance in adolescence can have a permanent effect on the brain. And that is another reason why for that reason, I would think if we're going to legalize marijuana, it should certainly be that part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex that has to do with risk-taking, judgment, things like that, is not fully formed in humans until the early 20s. So
that's why those statistics.
That's right.
It's because the brain isn't fully. I'm not an expert on this, but I've worked as a volunteer for 14 years with incarcerated youth. And I guarantee you, they have access to all of this stuff. It's just part of their life. Sex, alcohol, and drugs are their daily life.
I would encourage all of you to
What's missing is parental control.
Yes, but I would encourage all of you to take a tour of some of the inner city neighborhoods in Houston. And it would be helpful if you had a memory of how those neighborhoods thrived years ago before the introduction of substances like crack cocaine and other those stuff devastated our neighborhoods.
Before the war on drugs.
No, it wasn't war on drugs.
No.
Yeah.
Before health issues, before it was given to the health issues.
We do need to stop. We're going to stay on time. We have a 15-minute break now. The next set, but first I just really want to thank our distinguished articulate panel today. Thank you. Do come back at 11 o'clock because we're going to start another one.